The following is a fan summary for entertainment purposes only and is not intended to replace the original series, The Boys. The Boys is owned by Amazon Prime Video. Please support the official release. The season opens with our mind-blowing character Victoria Newman celebrating her big win in front of a large audience as she is now the newly elected Vice President of the United States. As we all know, Newman is quite a power-hungry person and is also being manipulated by Homelander so that if she becomes president, he can better accomplish his goals because he can trust her since she is also a Supe. While Victoria was giving her speech, the boys were already cooking and had gone undercover as waiters to take her out. While they were discussing their plan in more detail, Homelander met Victoria and her daughter with his son Ryan and sent the kids off so that they could talk in peace. However, Victoria didn't like this at all, as Homelander was accused of having lasered a man's head off in the last episode of Season 3 because he had committed the worst crime you can do in this world. He threw Ryan off with a can. Classic Homelander then, because the superhero saved this man from 300 years in prison. Ryan and Zoe, Newman's daughter, were now in the kitchen where they were alone. Quite strange because during such a big celebration, I assume that there are lots of cooks conjuring up a feast. But that's not quite true, because Butcher was still there and wanted to adopt Ryan again. Ryan sent Zoe back to her hotel room because he wanted to tell the old geezer once and for all that he was just Homelander's son. After Butcher's talk, no jutsu didn't work so well on Ryan. Homelander got into the scene as well, probably because he'd heard the conversation with his super hearing. Ryan listened to his father rather than old Butcher, so they made their way back to the party, where Smash Mouth provided musical accompaniment. Afterwards, it was finally the boys' turn to carry out their plan. Their plan was to swap the eye drops that were in Newman's hotel room with some kind of liquid. The background to this is probably because Newman often needs to moisten her eyes due to her super ability, which is responsible for her ability. When Kimiko and Frenchie were in the hotel room with some side characters, Zoe also came into the room. She noticed Frenchie and Kimiko and knew straight away, yep, shit's about to hit the fan. She then used her new Supe ability to take out the side characters directly. She was a kind of xenomorph, which allowed her to pull 4 snake-like worms out of her mouth and kill the NPCs. Kimiko tried to fight it, but even she didn't really stand a chance against it. So the only option was to run and jump out of the hotel. Lowlight, I meant Starlight, then jumped into the sky with her fancy powers to catch her, but she only succeeded with Frenchie. So the plan went badly wrong and the boys were forced to retreat before Homelander and Co showed up. While the others were still on their way, Newman joined Huey, who was in a van, and they started talking about the old days when Huey used to work for them. When Newman started to get sentimental, Huey took the opportunity to take his oat milk and throw it at Newman. It was actually acid, which was supposed to corrode her. When this failed, Butcher came out of nowhere, having been dumped by Ryan once again, and shot Newman in the head with a big desert eagle, the shot merely bouncing off her head. After that didn't help either. It was pretty awkward, and nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. Newman took it quite calmly though, and went back to the party. So the team had failed badly and returned to the CIA, where they were taught better. As Butcher waited outside the room like a little schoolchild to be told off too, his old colleague Joe Kessler came out of nowhere and they started talking. Butcher gave him some alcohol, and Butcher also explained to him why Homelander had taken him properly from behind. After also had some talk with his wife, Homelander was going through a midlife crisis as he struggles to control the Seven. He is frustrated with the loyalty of his team members and their lack of challenge. Homelander gives a speech to his team members in which he expresses his dissatisfaction with their performance and loyalty. In the process, he forces the Peak to sexually humiliate A-Train to demonstrate her submissiveness, but breaks off the act before it goes too far to show his dominance. So he wasn't in the mood for the clowns anymore, so he left and went to talk to Sister Sage. So while Butcher was selling the boy's ass to Newman and sending her data, Starlight and company were at headquarters discussing the new campaign to increase the profitability of their stock, or something like that. Huey also came along to the party and met Colin, a colleague from the other bank, whom he took a liking to. The two of them sparkled so much that Homelander ditched his superhero costume and arrived at Sister Sage's apartment. So we saw Homelander in normal clothes for the first time in the series. Absolutely insane. He talked to Sister Sage and told her that she could use Homelander's strength to carry out her plans and practically rebuild the world to her will. She liked that, and it was official that she was the newest member of the Seven. The boys found out about this and immediately stalked Sister Sage. They saw her with Todd and 2 other guys who went to a fan meeting with Homelander and Co, their biggest stars. However, this wasn't such a good decision as Homelander gave Noir, Peak and A-Train the order to kill them. Of course, they did so without a second thought. It was all part of Sister Sage though, as it turned out that the bodies were subsequently used to start a war between the Homelander fans and the Starlight fans, as it was said that Todd and the other NPCs were killed by Starlight's followers. So Butcher, the snitch, went all out and sent Newman the secret information the boys had of her. Newman opened it with excitement and was not disappointed, because it was a picture of the human portal for the brown source, which had caught Newman quite off guard. But it wasn't just Newman who was caught off guard, because we viewers weren't spared either, because we now saw A-Train on the set of his new movie, which we are all very much anticipating. Starlight, meanwhile, was in hospital looking after her friend Kiara, who had taken quite a beating at the Battle of Middle-earth against Homelander's followers. But Huey was also at the hospital, whose father was dying there due to health problems. Ryan was also dying inside because the PR geniuses at Vought wanted to introduce him to the world as the next Homelander, Homeboy or Superboy. Sage had imagined describing him as the perfect superhero, chosen by God to save the world. However, Homelander felt offended by this because he has the All Saints complex and only labelled Ryan as chosen because he was created by him and should be marketed as such. But Sage said, "Nah, shut the fuck up," and Homelander accepted that. So Ryan was about to become the biggest superstar in the world and was already rehearsing his first episode right on set. With a voice that sounds like he's Jeff from 21 Jump Street. After the boys failed to eliminate Newman, they had to find other ways to earn a living. So they went to a conspiracy convention in search of Firecracker, another super with possible connections to Homelander and co. There, Kimiko got proper flashbacks of her old days in the fighting camps, which led her to the only logical conclusion, and she got drunk during the mission. That actually went pretty well too, and they managed to find out where Sister Sage and Firecracker's secret meeting was supposed to take place. But not only did they find that, they also found Splinter, the Naruto of the boys' universe, having a pretty good time in the sauna. Someone who wasn't having so much fun, however, was A-Train, who was in the middle of telling his nephews what a badass superhero he was, apparently unaware that he was being stalked by Huey and Starlight. After telling them stories of his most epic saves, as any uncle would, his brother Nathan came along in a wheelchair and refuted his stories, telling his kids the truth about their uncle. This didn't make our speed star so happy though, so he made a run for it, to the detriment of Huey and Starlight, who wanted to confront him. The other part was still in the middle of the operation with Firecracker and Sage, and MM beat the crap out of Butcher, as he's just an old man because of Temp V and will only jeopardize the mission. So after A-Train is the next snitch and drops off a USB stick with the truth regarding Starlight's followers to Huey and Starlight, and Ryan makes his first kill on the set, Kimiko and co. went to the room where Firecracker was supposed to meet with Sister Sage. However, since Sage is the smartest person in the world, she was already sure and practically predicted that the boys were lurking around and would be there too. So it turned into a confrontation between Firecracker, Splinter, the other NPCs and the boys. We see a cool fight and the power of Naruto, I meant Splinter of course, who can create doppelgangers. In the end of course, Kimiko and co win and Firecracker manages to escape. Ryan couldn't escape his guilt though, because unlike Homelander, he still saw other people as living beings and not just toys, so he can't deal with his first murder that well. So we're dealing with a lot of problems here, as well as Frenchie finding out that his new lover Colin is the very son of the family that killed Frenchie. Furthermore, Huey also has a lot of problems with his father, and is therefore thinking about getting Compound V just to save him, which is pretty understandable of course, since his father is the only person he grew up with, and I think anyone would try anything to protect their loved ones. So while the boys were in the process of failing because of their own problems, Homelander continued to grind in order to massively increase the shareholder value of his company. He does this by investing heavily in employees, and now presents the two new members of the Seven on a large stage in front of hundreds of people, Sister Sage and Firecracker. Furthermore, Butcher and Joe Kessler devised a plan to somehow stun Ryan in order to get him away from Homelander. Very strong plan for sure. So they want to kidnap him and then force him to raise him somewhere else, whether he likes it or not. And what do the boys do? Meanwhile, they were in their big office watching TV together, where Firecracker had taken an indirect shot at Starlight because they were obviously old enemies. Ryan didn't want to hear any of this crap and instead played Mortal Kombat, or rather Boys Combat, where he suddenly got a friend request from Butcher, with whom he then mopped the floor in the game. However, Butcher was able to convince Ryan to meet up with him. Homelander didn't notice any of this because he was in the conference room with the rest of the 7 dwarves discussing very important things, such as the fact that someone had stolen the camera footage from Vought and passed it on to Starlight. Since A-Train was also there, he knew he had to be all the more careful, especially since Sister Sage is the smartest person in the world. While Butcher tried to drug Homelander's son with cupcakes, A-Train met with MM and tried to push him to pull A-Train to the dark side of the Force, just like Huey had gotten himself some shrooms, because when he and Kimiko arrived at a child trafficking warehouse, he saw some pretty mystical visions and his PTSD from the families and people he had eliminated in the past. Now, while Ryan almost got into Butcher's van through the cupcakes, Annika was interrogated by Homelander and Sister Sage, and then also subsequently killed by him, which made me a bit sad because she was genuinely totally innocent, unlike Starlight, who was subsequently confronted by Firecracker at a meeting because of their shared past. So everything went pretty well, and old acquaintances met up again. Sister Sage and the Peak had a nice evening together, and everything went perfectly. Except for Homelander, because he had noticed that Ryan almost got into Butcher's van and thought that Butcher would manage to adopt Ryan after all. So there was only one solution for Homelander to straighten out this father and son relationship. He had to visit his former home, the laboratory where it all began, and so he did, visiting his old acquaintances in the basement of Vought. This season was all about getting closer to his old friends again. That's why Firecracker decided to set up a concert right in front of Starlight's headquarters. Starlight was so happy about this that she decided to call the boys together to pay her a surprise visit on the evening of her concert. What fun they will have. Just as Homelander is having fun with his old colleagues in the cellar because he has remembered the oven from back then, where he could get a nice tan. So he decides to invite his old best friend Frank over for a game of waste paper basketball. If he won, he could have said goodbye to the party earlier. So while they were playing, Homelander told an old story from childhood and told Frank to go into the oven too, so he could see this cool perspective from the inside. So Frank went in, Homelander turned on the oven, and Frank started tanning too. The problem, however, was that they had forgotten to put the safety level on, and Frank was then tanned unconscious. Happens to even the best, apparently. When Huey, Kimiko, and A-Train met up, Huey asked A-Train to get a bottle of Compound V for him so he could satisfy his energy addiction or save his dad with it, I'm unsure here. Firecracker meanwhile was live at her concert and told the whole world some dramatic stories of Starlight, with one story making her cry. So A-Train was already in Homelander's chambers and was about to steal a bottle of Compound V when he then noticed Ashley, who took a liking to doing her business on Homelander's toilet. I can totally understand that, because it's probably the best toilet in the world, and Homelander was just in the basement, where he brought Marty over and wanted to reenact an old story where Marty had been given the task of creating friction in a very sensitive area very quickly. That didn't work out so well though, so Homelander had added some fire to it, which summoned the absolute boss. So shit was hotting up, so Starlight stormed into her friend Firecracker's concert full of anticipation to greet her in person. Meanwhile, Butcher and MM were also there to leave a gift in their trailer. However, they were stopped by Ezekiel, and an argument broke out as he wanted them to deliver the gift in person. When Butcher started to pass out as he was about to lose this argument, he was surrounded by blood after being woken up. Obviously, someone came to his rescue. It certainly wasn't Homelander, as he was still in the basement with Barbara, the CEO of Vought's basement activities, and they were now discussing why Homelander wasn't allowed to have so much fun as a child. Meanwhile, Frenchie wasn't having fun either, as he confessed to Colin that he had eliminated his family back then, which is why Colin ruthlessly beat him up. To prevent this from happening, you have to become strong. And how do you become strong? Right, by ingesting blue chemicals, which Huey got from A-Train to save his father. He also went straight out to give his father a load. And while Huey's dad got a load of Compound V, Barbara got a load of bad memories for life. So Huey's father had now been given a slightly stronger version of steroids, and was finally about to become a Ronnie Coleman. Things looked all the more peaceful at Butcher's, who was having a nice date with Joe Kessler on a bench in the park and discussing the next moves. They decided to meet up with the boys at headquarters and had the great idea of getting Stan Edgar out of prison. This was easily done with the help of CIA and the explanation to him that his beloved Newman had simply pumped her daughter full of Compound V. This disturbed Gus Fring so much that the fast food store manager had to give her a parenting slap in person. To do this, they went to Stan's old house, since they all know that Newman has a virus that is a deadly weapon against supers, but not humans. When they got there, God willing, Newman and her bodyguards arrived on the scene to find out why Gus Fring had wrecked his drug lab. However, it wasn't in the lab, so the crew and Newman set out to scour the entire farm to find the virus. When they arrived at a barn, they noticed a noise coming from a chicken. It wasn't just a normal chicken though, it was a chicken nugget pumped full of Compound V, seeking revenge on Gus Fring for his fast food chains. The boys barely escaped the barn, with the loss of an NPC bodyguard, and continued their search. While Butcher now also saw a dying Bugs Bunny pumped full of V, Huey had to watch as his father had now eliminated a nurse with the power of V as well. It's hard to believe that a single bottle of Compound V supposedly costs $19 billion when these things are apparently selling like hotcakes. Huey's father had quite a nervous breakdown, as Compound V had also given him a mighty memory lapse. But Huey had a plan to combat this. Meanwhile, the boys had almost reached another barn, which is why they decided to take a break. A serious mistake, as it turned out, because almost everything on the farm was infected with V. Just like a bull who was mauled by flying sheep just before he could charge towards the boys. They sought shelter in the new barn and found Samir, the guy and lover of Newman, who also turned out to be Zoe's father and created the virus. So they had to figure out what to do and came up with the best idea they could, and that was, instead of calling for help or anything, just wait until nightfall and then just run for their own lives scattered about. That actually worked out well, except for Samir, who had nothing left but his leg. At least that's what we assume, because we see Joe Kessler and Butcher holding Samir captive in an underground and forcing him to recreate the virus that was lost in the escape. So they didn't manage to recover the virus, which is why the deal with Stan Fring fell through, and they were going to put him back in jail until Newman kindly asked the driver if she could free him directly from the car, which the driver accepted with no problem. Needless to say, this was a lot for Butcher to digest, and Huey had to take a fair bit of punishment too, as he managed to calm his father down and let him slowly fall asleep to his death with a strange concoction. As a Frenchman, this was all too much for Frenchie, and so he did his ancestors proud by turning himself into the police and giving up. Kimiko was feeling like Dr. Disrespect's fans for the next few days, so pretty much played and wanted to find out what this was all about, so she tried to visit Frenchie in prison. Meanwhile, the rest of the boys were on to the next plan, and they tracked down Webweaver, the Spider-Man of this universe. They got Webweaver's costume through drugs, which allowed Huey to come to Tech Knight's party that night dressed as him. Why are all the Supes drug addicts? That's just as bad as all the Twitch streamers who can't help but chat up minors. So they came to the party, and there were the richest people in America. This was a very important meeting, as Homelander in particular was also there to discuss something. Huey, disguised as Webweaver, was in the middle of it all, and did his best to bug the house with spy equipment in order to gather information. This worked well for the most part, until Batman suddenly ordered Wish to approach him so that he could show him his secret cave. There, Tech Knight turned out to be a perverted sadist who wanted Webweaver as his next sidekick to torture him for his fetishes. As Huey lies tied up on a cot, out of nowhere comes Ashley, who also tortures him. As the boys tried to get Huey out of this bad situation, Starlight met Firecracker, who then tried harder to hug each other. Kimiko and also met Sister Sage, whose brain was then blown out due to provocations towards who then also suffered a heart attack due to the stressful moment. Kimiko was lucky that A-Train was also there, and she lured him into the room, who then transported to a hospital for the sake of his daughter. It was a really nice moment there, because there was also a little boy present who witnessed this selfless act. A-Train was unsure at first, as he didn't know how the boy would react, but the boy smiled at A-Train and was obviously very happy about this heroic deed. This was the first time A-Train had been able to save someone, and he ran off overjoyed. The party went on, of course, and Homelander now wanted to express his real intention there. With Newman, he explained that he wanted to use the 25th Amendment to have Newman become the first Supe president. This would mean a proper power shift and change the whole world. A world that Tech Knight won't get to see, however, as he is subsequently strangled by his butler after being overpowered by Kimiko and Starlight. It was pretty bitter, but Butcher probably had to swallow the bitterest pill, as he was now convinced that his wife had risen from the dead because Joe Kessler could see her. Butcher couldn't believe it and asked what was going on. The absolute plot twist came to light that Joe Kessler, like his wife, was no longer alive and that he had only imagined him. He was also saved by this imagination when Ezekiel was killed by him, because Joe Kessler had taken over his body for a short time. Next we see Ryan in a Christmassy throwback to an old Vought Christmas show. Superboy is practicing for a children's commercial in which he has to sing a jingle about Antifa and the dangers to America. Since Ryan is obviously more in favour of capitalism, he can't identify with it at all, so he goes back to his room in a huff, where he finds a Christmas present from Butcher. Full of joy, he opens the present only to see that it is a picture of Butcher, his mother, and her dog. As a 15-year-old boy, you'd rather have the latest Fortnite Battle Pass or Robux, but oh well. So as well as bad Christmas presents, the boys are also planning their next move, including Frenchie again. They find out that a Supe wants to eliminate President Singer, so they have to find him and take him out. They get clues in an apartment where they go and find him, who has posed as a woman and takes advantage of the boys' naivety to run. A chase ensues, during which the shapeshifter manages to escape, but that was obvious because MM wasn't even there. The guy was just packing his things to make off with Monique and his daughter. They had made up and just wanted to forget everything, especially after MM had suffered a heart attack. But A-Train came at the last second and made it clear to him that Homelander could also travel to other countries and wouldn't just stay in America. It was now Frenchie and Kimiko's turn to watch Samir so that he would actually continue working on the virus. This brought them closer together again, as did Homelander's hands on Webweaver after Firecracker said he was the leak for Vault Security's missing footage. After the Peak also had his beloved Octopus killed, he was ready to go through hell for Homelander. His first mission was to simply take out the boys, as Homelander was definitely too proud to simply eliminate his biggest enemies. So the Peak and Noir went to the boys' headquarters, where they waited for Starlight and Butcher, and a big fight broke out, which Starlight and Butcher obviously lost. Just before they could greet Translucent, A-Train came out of nowhere and smashed the Peak into the wall. They had also found out that A-Train was the leak and that Spider-Weaver had died in vain. However, just before Noir could make the bird with his flying skills, MM arrived with a minigun and shot him out of the window. The Peak and Noir were thus defeated, and the boys had to clear their heads by drinking themselves into a coma in a bar. Starlight was, of course, still famous, and a woman asked her for a photo, which she gave. Meanwhile, Homelander found out that A-Train was the one who had cheated on him and started crying like a little girl about it, which makes absolutely no sense to me. He treats him like shit for years, and then after he gets betrayed by A-Train, he starts crying. Classic Homelander. Samir had also managed to recreate the virus in the meantime and tested it directly on Kimiko, whose leg had to be amputated by Frenchie because otherwise she would have died. So now it was Frenchie's turn to recreate the virus, while Ryan made a fool of himself in the children's show. This didn't suit Superboy at all, and he first had to clarify the facts on camera and explain that he would rather be labelled a mama's boy than a little girl. The problem now, though, was that Huey has now done some pretty nasty things to Starlight in the bedroom, which turns out to be fatal because apparently this has never happened before, and Starlight was kidnapped by the old woman who had taken a photo with her. She was the shapeshifter, and the real Starlight was trapped in some abandoned house and couldn't even free herself from steel chains. Shapeshifter has now taken the footage they could have used against Victoria. So things weren't really going well for the boys, and the shapeshifter couldn't keep up his transformation any longer either. That's why he proposed to Huey, transformed as Starlight, who happily accepted and simply trolled again as best he could. Butcher was on his deathbed due to the V-tumor, and Joe Kessler offered to save him, but he wanted to use Samir's virus to eliminate all the Supes in the world. Butcher didn't want to do that though, because he had promised his late Becca to protect Ryan, who had just walked into his and Homelander's apartment at the same time, which wasn't such a good idea. Homelander had found Butcher's Christmas present, the picture, and had trashed the whole apartment, which is why Ryan ran out as a classic teenage edgelord. Homelander was so pissed off about it that he didn't give a shit by then, and on the next live talk show, he lasered Newman to out her as Supe in front of the whole world. Of course, she didn't like that at all, which is why she spoke to Homelander quite angrily, and he is now on the verge of snapping for good. He asks Ashley for a whole list of employees within Vought who could do something to him in terms of information or anything else that would make him look stupid. So, while Homelander went completely on the offensive, the boys found out that the information they had against Newman had all been deleted. Therefore, they were left with only one way to win. They had to go to President Singer to protect him from the probable assassination attempt. Meanwhile, Grace had somehow managed to convince Ryan to meet with her and Butcher to make possible arrangements to get him away from Homelander. But not only did he have to leave, so did Ashley, who had heard from the Peak and his minions at the meeting that she was also on the list of people who had something on Homelander. She therefore saw only one way to save herself. She sprinted straight to Homelander's wrecked apartment and poured herself a load of Compound V. Understandable, because A-Train was already gone and there was no one left to help her. I also made a video about the possible powers she got. Link is in the video description. Meanwhile, the boys were with President Singer in an underground bunker that was crawling with CIA bodyguards. Everything seemed to be going perfectly until Huey found out that Starlight wasn't really Starlight, but the shapeshifter. She had also noticed that he had checked and a one-sided fight ensued, with the shapeshifter killing every CIA agent. Man, that would be one of the few worlds where I wouldn't be a normal person. The shapeshifter was also able to win against Kimiko in the fight, and he was on the verge of taking out Singer once and for all. But at the last second, Starlight came out of nowhere and fought him and even won. When the boys got back to their headquarters, there was a lot of commotion, but Frenchie managed to reconstruct the virus in the meantime. But not only that, Huey had also received a call from Newman, who wanted to turn herself in because she was no longer in the mood for Homelander. Just as tired as the Peak had been when he had mercilessly eliminated every employee in the Vault Tower, the boys had agreed on the meeting and the tension was higher than ever. Since everything was about to go down the drain anyway, Kimiko and Frenchie, after talking it over again, figured it was time to do the kiss cam. It was a different kind of fun for Ryan, however, who had found out what Grace and Butcher had planned for him and wanted to lock him up just like his father. Ryan couldn't contain his emotions and shoved Grace against the wall with such force that he accidentally broke her neck. He looked at Grace's lifeless body completely coldly and without regret before walking out completely relaxed. Butcher couldn't believe it and was now certain that there was definitely no way to save Ryan now. He looked Joe Kessler in the eye and was obviously ready to go all out. As was Newman, who had now arrived with her daughter at Huey & Co. Just before everything went well, however, Butcher came out of nowhere. Everyone was quite surprised, especially as he looked pretty healthy, but he didn't want to leave it at that. He showed everyone his new superpower, which he used to blow Newman up and into two pieces. They were alien-like worms that came out of his body, practically like Venom and the Bugs Bunny we saw in episode 5. So Newman was dead, and Frenchie was about to fire the poison he had created at Butcher. However, as this would mean the absolute end, he didn't do it, and Butcher happily took the poison with him. So things weren't looking good for the boys at all, and Homelander was also in trouble, having lost his dream of a super president with Newman. He also hadn't seen Ryan for a long time, and it looked like everyone had left him, until Sister Sage suddenly reappeared out of nowhere and she explained to him that it was all part of her plan. And this plan was apparently really good, because after Newman was eliminated, the boys planned to go into hiding in small groups. They didn't get far though, because all of them were caught and captured by new super units, except for Starlight, who, God willing, got her superpower back at the last second and was able to fly away at hyperspeed. And of course Butcher, who drove through a country road at night with Joe Kessler and had to plan his next move. At the end of the last episode we see Homelander, who together with the new president located Soldier Boy, who was still in a cryogenic sleep. And that's really it from the entire 4th season of The Boys. I've tried my best to mention the most important things without going too far. I hope you enjoyed it anyway. What do you think? Will there be a soupy war in the next season? Will the boys, all pumped full of Compound V, fight together with A-Train and Ashley against Homelander and Co? I think it's been a really long time since I was this hyped for a season of a show. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to see more videos of The Boys and other series. Have a great day and see you next time.